Good evening, everyone. We are excited that you're joining. We're going to start the presentation in just a couple of minutes. I'm going to repeat myself a few times on things that we want you to know before we get started, just so we can give a couple of minutes for folks who are dialing in or clicking into the presentation. My name is Jane Kleeb. I started a group called Bold Nebraska with other folks over 12 years ago. With the purpose of protecting the land and water in our state. We took on a project called the Keystone XL Pipeline, which I'm sure you've heard about if you live in the state of Nebraska, and made sure that that foreign oil company wasn't using eminent domain on farmers and ranchers in our state for their private gain. And because that was an export pipeline, we particularly felt very strongly about that. A lot of the information that we're going to talk about, you can find on nebraskaeasement.org. You can also find other webinars around pipeline safety and protecting property rights on pipelinefightershub.org. Those are two resource sites where we link to a lot of research papers and videos and expert information for you to educate yourself. So I know people are continuing to hop on. We're going to wait one more minute before we get started. Again, my name's Jane Kleeb. I run the group Bold Nebraska. The other individuals you'll be hearing from tonight are Paul Blackburn. He is a pipeline expert and has been engaged in issues surrounding pipelines for over a decade. Brian Jorde, you will hear from as well. He is with the Domina Law Group. He is a lawyer that the Nebraska Easement team has brought on to make sure that people's property rights are protected. He'll talk about the legal landowner co-op model that we have started here in Nebraska, and that's now running in Iowa, Nebraska, South Dakota, and North Dakota. So for everybody who just joined us, we're going to go ahead and get started. My name's Jane Kleeb. I'm with Bold Nebraska. We are a group that is not only working in Nebraska, but we're working actually across the region and across the entire country, all with the focus of protecting people's property rights against corporate projects that try to use eminent domain for private gain. That's mostly pipelines. And in this particular instance, we're going to specifically be talking about Tallgrass Pipeline, which is a current existing fracked gas pipeline that has now petitioned to FERC, which is a federal agency, to convert from a fracked gas pipeline to a carbon pipeline. That obviously brings up a lot of concerns that you as landowners who probably have this pipeline existing in your land and may not have been the original person to sign that initial contract. So we're going to talk about all of those issues that surround that. But before we do, I'm going to start with just a few slides about what the carbon pipelines are. So right now, what this map is, this is a map of carbon pipelines that are being proposed that would be new pipelines. These would be pipelines that would cross Iowa, Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota, Minnesota, and Illinois. So you might have heard a lot about these pipelines in the media. They're called Navigator and Summit. The pipeline that we're talking about specifically tonight is the Tallgrass Pipeline. That would be an existing fracked gas pipeline that's already in the ground going from Wyoming, Colorado to Nebraska, servicing communities along the way. In Nebraska, it ends in Beatrice. It kind of goes through the kind of lower part of the panhandle through counties even that I live in called Adams County, and then ends in Beatrice. What they're currently planning to do, the company that owns Tallgrass Trailblazer Pipeline, is to switch from a fracked gas pipeline to a carbon pipeline. That would mean that they would collect carbon dioxide from ethanol plants, and they currently are saying that they have a contract with ADM in Columbus, which would mean that they would have to build new pipelines, not just use existing pipelines. And they capture that carbon, they pump it at very high pressure, up to 2,600 PSI, which is much higher pressure than fracked gas pipelines are built to hold. And they take that liquid now carbon through the pipeline up into Wyoming, where they are saying that they will inject that into the ground where it will safely stay. The problem with all of this is that there are already documented white papers and research papers showing the concerns of converting a gas pipeline to a carbon pipeline, which Paul Blackburn is going to talk about a little bit more after me. The other concern is that they're saying that this is a big climate solution, but we believe at Bold that no climate solution should put families at risk. The problems with carbon pipelines is that we actually don't know a lot about them. Right now, we have about 5,000 miles of carbon pipelines in the United States. But most of that is used for enhanced oil recovery, essentially get to oil and gas in difficult places. We don't have really, decades long experience with what it would look like of pumping millions of metric tons of liquid carbon into the ground, what that would mean to groundwater, what that would mean to the formations. Would we see earthquakes like we saw with the injection of fracking fluids? The other problems with carbon pipelines is that there are real safety and health concerns. When a carbon pipeline explodes, it can literally essentially suffocate you in the area and potentially kill you and kill cattle and cause other harm. A lot of these pipeline companies are saying it's no problem if one of their pipelines explodes because the carbon will go into the air and evaporate. And that's just not true. It is a dense gas and will go onto the floor and essentially hug the ground. And we actually don't know, and they haven't made public, how far that gas in its deadly form would travel. It is clear that we need more studies and laws needed around carbon pipelines. In our state, there's no agency that essentially would look and say, okay, there's a carbon pipeline that's being proposed in our state. Let's make sure we give landowners a due process to air their concerns, figure out what a best route is, and all the other kind of regulatory structures you would have around this big of a project. They have those structures in place in other states, including Iowa and South Dakota. Nebraska has none of those laws. Nebraska did pass a law last legislative session that essentially says that carbon storage is welcomed in our state, in particular in the Panhandle. But they didn't deal with how carbon would get to the storage sites, which is now where we are in the issue of having an unregulated and untested situation in our state because there are no laws around carbon pipelines. At Summit and Navigator, which you should be aware of, even though this is a different pipeline company, they are using a lot of the pipeline tactics that other pipeline companies use to harass landowners, to tell them only half truths, and to essentially wave some money in front of landowners in order to get them to sign easements. This is a different process in the sense that you have an existing pipeline on your ground, but there are things that we think as an organization like BOLD, the Nebraska Easement Action Team that represents the legal interests of landowners, that we could do to help negotiate a stronger contract if this project does get approved for the conversion process or the abandonment process at FERC, and then if they continue to move forward with actually converting this from a fracked gas to a carbon pipeline. Brian's going to talk about more of those things that we think that we can do, but one of those would, for example, be a decommissioning clause in your current easement contract that you have with the pipeline company. You may wonder why all of a sudden are these pipelines being proposed all across the Midwest in particular. And now, not only are they wanting to build 60,000 miles of new carbon pipelines across our country, in particular in the Midwest, but now they want to convert existing gas pipelines to carbon. You may realize that the answer usually does come down to money. And in this particular instance, it does as well. This is not some big green climate solution. BOLD is very clear that we believe in climate change and support a lot of climate change initiatives. We don't support projects that put communities and families at risk, which is what we think this project does. There's a lot of money on the table. Some of these pipelines are saying that they will make anywhere from $400 to $600 million per year. And that's all coming from tax dollars that we pay to the federal government, that the federal government is putting on the table for carbon sequestration projects. The program is called the 45Q tax credit, And it's something that we're working currently with members of Congress to try to make sure it does not get refunded. That's one project that we're working on at the national level, but we have to keep fighting at the local level as well. So we're proud to be standing with you as an organization, making sure that your property rights are addressed and protected, and that a lot of the issues and questions that we'll have plenty of time to answer today are addressed. And we look forward to continuing to work with you. Before we turn it over to Brian Jorde, who will address the legal aspects of your contracts, I'm going to pass this over to Paul Blackburn, who's going to talk a little bit about what's exactly happening now with the fracked gas pipeline at the agency called FERC, and what that would mean and the concerns that folks have when a conversion pipeline is happening. Oh, Paul, just a reminder to go off mute.
That's part. Sorry. Thanks, Jane, and welcome to everybody on the call. I actually wanted to first talk a little bit about the lack of federal. I'm going to talk about federal regulation in general here. But first, one of the really remarkable things about these gas CO2 pipelines, and there's three forms of carbon dioxide, there's three states. There's gas, there's liquid, and there's something called the supercritical fluid, and they're all distinct physical states. And federal law, federal pipeline safety law, the law that determines like the thickness of a pipeline and whether it's being maintained adequately, its emergency response plans and all kinds of things related to its safety are regulated by the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration for oil pipelines and for supercritical CO2 pipelines, carbon dioxide pipelines. But PHMSA has not issued any regulations for gaseous carbon dioxide pipelines. So why is that significant here? Well, when they convert a natural gas pipeline such as Trailblazer to carbon dioxide service, that natural gas pipeline is not going to be strong enough to have high enough pressures to allow shipping it as a supercritical fluid. So they're going to ship this CO2 in Trailblazer as a gas. That's really significant because Congress told the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration to regulate that gaseous CO2 pipelines. And PHMSA did a report and then abandoned the regulatory process, the rulemaking process. So at this point, federal law requires that the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration regulate gas pipeline, CO2 gas pipelines. But PHMSA doesn't have any standards for that. So therefore, essentially at this point, CO2 gas pipelines are, there's no applicable safety regulations whatsoever. And in fact, it's likely that states couldn't even impose safety regulations because Congress, after all, did say that these CO2 gas pipelines are within federal jurisdiction. If they're in federal jurisdiction, then even if PHMSA hasn't issued any regulations, this means that the states can't march in and issue their own safety regulations. So essentially, if Trailblazer is converted and PHMSA doesn't issue any regulations, then there are no safety standards that will be applicable to it whatsoever. And the states can't step in and the counties can't step in either. So, there would be nothing to determine how thick the steel should be, or whether it's strong enough, or whether it's corroded too much, or what the emergency plans are like, or how the pumps are operated, or how many valves there are, or where the valves are located. None of that would apply to this pipeline. That's a really remarkable oversight. Now, BOLD co-funded an independent report, which we did not control the substance of, by a gentleman named Richard Cooperwitz, who's a pipeline engineer and has been doing this for decades. And that report is by Accufax. You can find it on the BOLD Alliance website. In that report, it details the fact that these pipelines are not regulated. The safety of these pipelines are not regulated by gas CO2 pipelines such as Trailblazer, are not be regulated by the federal government. So you can find more detail about that on our website. But this is a remarkable safety gap that really needs to be addressed. Now, PHMSA has said they're going to do a rulemaking, but who knows how long that would take. And PHMSA has been known to start a rulemaking and then just simply abandon the effort. So there's no clear sense that PHMSA would ever regulate the safety of these gas CO2 pipelines. Or if they do, it might be, years or sometimes even over a decade to get new regulations issued. So we think this creates a significant safety risk for the communities along the route and the individuals and families along the route. So that's the situation with federal safety regulation. I also wanted to talk briefly, as Jane mentioned, about the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and the process there related to this pipeline. So the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, does not have jurisdiction over carbon dioxide pipelines of any type, but it does have jurisdiction over natural gas pipelines. And since the Trailblazer currently ships natural gas, FERC, the federal agency, has the right to decide whether Tallgrass, the owner of Trailblazer, can stop using this pipeline for natural gas service. So FERC could say to Tallgrass, well, nice idea, but we really need this pipeline to keep shipping natural gas, so we're not going to let you withdraw it from natural gas service. And in order to withdraw a natural gas pipeline from service, the pipeline company has to file what's called an application for abandonment with FERC. And Tallgrass did so on May 27th. And since then, a number of parties have filed both motions to intervene and public comments. Now, on May 9th, just a little over 2 weeks after the application was filed, FERC issued an order saying that all public comments and all interventions need to be received at FERC by June 30th. So that's 21 days. It's not a very long intervention period, not at all. We will probably be asking for an extension of this because this is a complex project that people know almost nothing about, and giving communities and individuals just 21 days to decide if they want to intervene and how they're going to do that logistically, or if they're going to do comments, is just simply unreasonable, we believe. So we're hoping to get an extension filed for that, but can't count on that. So if folks want to weigh in at the federal level at FERC, they need to consider that June 30th deadline. Now, so what does Trailblazer do right now? Well, it's one of 3 pipelines that bring natural gas from natural gas fields to, let's see, I believe it's the Northern Natural Gas Pipeline System. So what's the Northern Natural Gas Pipeline System? Owned by a different company. This is a distribution pipeline system that distributes a huge amount of natural gas to Iowa, eastern South Dakota, Minnesota, most of Minnesota, Wisconsin, and parts of Illinois. So what does Trailblazer really do? Well, it provides natural gas for home heating, industrial purposes, and whatever to the upper north central Midwest. And the question before FERC is whether withdrawing this pipeline from service would either restrict supply to this region, natural gas supply, which is pretty critical, especially in the wintertime, but it's also critical for grain drying and all kinds of purposes. So the question before FERC is whether withdrawing this from service would either restrict supply or would have adverse economic impacts, like increase the cost of gas. So far, the companies that have intervened at FERC on this issue include Koch Energy, which ships essentially ship natural gas on this pipeline, and they're concerned about having the ability to move enough natural gas for the customers. But Koch Energy, Miyako, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, Limited Liability Corporation, it's another natural gas marketer, Concord Energy, Tenaska Marketing Ventures, British Petroleum, BP Energy Company, and Chevron. And we don't know exactly what their positions are, because when they file a motion to intervene, they don't have to say what they think about this. They just are going to intervene. But suffice to say, they're all shippers on this pipeline, and therefore they're all probably concerned about the ability to move natural gas to their customers, which very well could include you as one of their ultimate customers. The only intervention in support of this so far is by a company out of Houston called Vitol Inc., which is part owner of one of the ethanol plants that we serve by this. So those are the folks that have intervened. And, depending on what they say and what their experts and their analysis is, they may be able to prove that this pipeline is necessary. Again, Trailblazer is one of three. The other two come up from the Gulf Coast, but this one is the only one that comes out of and serves this community that comes out of Rocky Mountains. Now, what Tallgrass is proposed to do is to increase the capacity of a pipeline that parallels Trailblazer. And this other pipeline is called the Rockies Express Pipeline, or the REX pipeline. So they want to take Trailblazer out of commission for natural gas and instead increase the throughput on this REX pipeline. Now, that could have a variety of operational constraints. It could change the cost structures. It could mean that there's simply less redundancy in the natural gas system, and therefore if there's an outage, could affect supply. And we'll just have to see what these companies are going to say in their interventions. But I wouldn't at this point, until we see what their interventions, what their arguments are, I wouldn't assume that this conversion would be unopposed at FERC. So we'll see what happens with that. So far, there's only been a few comments filed at FERC, and those are included by Governor Ricketts of Nebraska, the Nebraska Public Power District in support, which maybe is a bit surprising given their big natural gas customer, but maybe they haven't thought this through. Colorado Senators Bennett and Hickenlooper and the Governor of Colorado. And then Wyoming Senators Barrasso and Loomis and Congresswoman Liz Cheney. So those are the only folks that have filed public comments so far and in support of the project. But citizens are more than welcome to file comments in opposition and to raise issues or questions about this. So again, FERC won't be concerned about what happens with the natural gas that goes through it. It's only concerned about whether this would adversely impact natural gas supply or natural gas price. So, but again, it's the Trailblazer could have a significant impact on a very large part of the north central United States. So that's what I have for the federal regulatory side of this. The FERC will also be preparing either environmental assessment or environmental impact statement. Citizens can certainly ask for a full environmental impact statement in the comments. Whether they do it or not is an open question, but they're going to do some kind of environmental review for this, so we'll have to watch for that. They have 90 days to file something on that from the time that the notice was out, so that would be in August. Anyway, I'm happy. I'll be on afterwards to answer some questions. If you have any questions, let me know, and thanks for being here again.
Thank you. And I know this is a lot of technical information, that this may be one of the first times that you're hearing this. And when we all started learning about carbon pipelines about a year ago, we know a lot about pipelines, but carbon pipelines are new to our world. And it took us several months to really kind of fully grasp all the risks and read a lot of the white papers that are coming out. So we'll leave plenty of time for questions at the end. Our next speaker is Jorde, and he is a lawyer with the Domina Law Group. He is an expert on pipelines, on eminent domain. He is the lead attorney that is making sure that the landowners in Iowa, Nebraska, South Dakota, and North Dakota, who are now part of legal landowner co-ops called easement action teams, are getting the legal representation that they need in things like the Iowa Utility Board process that is governing the permitting process for the new carbon pipelines. So Brian's going to talk about what options we might have on the table to organize landowners into a legal co-op around an existing pipeline, which is different than when we're organizing landowners around a building of a new pipeline.
Great. Yep. Thanks, Jane and Paul, and good to have all of you with us this evening. I'm going to share a few slides to walk through and help illustrate a little bit about what I'm thinking and some options for all of you. And then at the end, we'll be able to share our thoughts, concerns, and ask questions. All right. So as Jane said, I'm a lawyer here in Omaha, Nebraska with the Domina Law Group, and we had the distinct privilege to work for landowners just like you in Nebraska for the last 12 years. in all aspects related to pipeline and eminent domain and pipeline negotiations and landowner concerns. So we feel very confident in this area and being able to help all of you. We have, along with the help of BOLD, organized easement action teams across currently 4 states, and this here happens to show the summit map across 4 states. Of course, you folks are concerned with the route going through Nebraska and then Wyoming, Colorado. But this is to illustrate that there's folks just like you being confronted with these pipelines. Now, you happen to have an existing pipeline, but it wasn't constructed, wasn't contemplated for use under the current conditions, and as to be able to withstand the specifications, the pounds per square inch, the substances being transported through the pipeline. And so even though you have a pipeline, it's not like one pipeline is the same for all. So you still have all of the same concerns of a untested project, which is a hundreds, if not thousands of miles of transporting CO2 via pipeline. And so we're privileged to be working with landowners across these 4 states, some also in Minnesota and Illinois, all related to these topics. And there's lots of synergy and crossover regardless of the name of the company that's proposing to do it. I show this slide to illustrate that, again, when I say people just like you, I really mean it. These are actual photos, some family photos of people across Nebraska who we worked with related to the Keystone XL pipeline issues and fight, who were concerned, confused, just like all of you. And they banded together under this model, which we created for them a decade ago and has been now used successfully across the country. And so I'm really appreciative that you're here joining us tonight. That's the first step, right? This isn't hopeless. There are options, and we'll talk about some of those. So the easement action team was designed and created by landowners for landowners, not only for the use on the Keystone XL, but for use for any type of major proposed projects that directly impact your legal rights, interests, and potentially your future and those of your family. And it's designed to empower and educate you folks, to let you know what your rights are, what your options are, and then put together a plan and implement that plan to best protect you, whether that be taking legal action to challenge the right of, can they even convert within Nebraska? Would they have to re-condemn? Do eminent domain rights apply to CO2 companies? And then also towards negotiations. So you might say, well, the pipeline's already there. They'll probably somehow get this. Doesn't it make more sense to negotiate? And maybe it does. Maybe it does. But it's better to negotiate in a block of people across the state, as opposed to each of you individually thinking you can do it on your own and negotiate the fine print of the contracts. And so the easement team, as you can take from the name, is really focused first and foremost on defending property rights through the best and strongest negotiation of easement terms, or whatever they want to call the agreement that they want to obtain from you to get to have the right to do what they want to now do, which is not contained in your original easements way back decades ago that you probably aren't even involved with. So landowner rights, you have lots of rights when you own land, rights to the surface, rights that are called vegetation rights to grow, to plant crops, trees, etc. You can improve the land, you can make buildings on it, you can put a pivot on it. Subterranean rights, rights to what's below, mineral rights most notably. Air rights, right to be free from interference in the air above your land, above your home. And rights to be free from other public nuisances such as noise or pollution or things that disturb your quiet enjoyment. And when you sign an agreement, whether it be an easement, whether it be an addendum to an easement or an expansion of an old easement, you are giving up more of your rights. And so the question is, if you are going to do that, what are you getting in return? And is what you're getting in return for giving up or eroding further your property rights in favor of the company that proposes to convert and do a project that is unprecedented at this scale? You might want to be pretty comfortable or sure that you are negotiating the best possible way that you can. And that's, again, what the easement team is all about when we get to that negotiation point. Here is exact language from, again, they're calling it an agreement. I have here proposal from Trailblazer Pipeline Co. LLC. Now, we don't know who that is, what their assets are, who's behind it, but that's the name of the outfit that wants to enter into an agreement with you. Now, here's one of the whereas clauses. It says landowner and company mutually desire to expand and extend the rights vested in company. Okay, so what do we know from that sentence? If they want you to sign a piece of paper that says you and they mutually agree and desire to expand and extend certain rights, that means they know, and this is acknowledgement, they don't already have the rights that they want from you. So again, you might be thinking, oh my gosh, I have the easement, the pipe's already there. Well, this is hopeless. That's not true, because they are now wanting to expand and extend and do something different, which is your kind of lever or the pinch point or your ability now to negotiate something for you, whether that be better terms, which we advocate is the most important part of this, and or increased compensation, which also should go hand in hand with this. And so keep that in mind when you or your neighbors or other people say, wow, there's nothing you can do, it's already there. If they had all the rights they needed, they wouldn't be wanting to try to expand and extend certain rights they claim they have. And then you can see there, one of the first provisions under the therefore clause says the grant. So that is, what is landowner granting to or giving away to these hazardous pipeline companies? Well, it says there that landowner and company agree that they can transport carbon dioxide by pipeline. Again, why would they seek your agreement if they already had the inherent right to do that? Which again, leverage for you if you use it properly to at least get a better deal and some financial compensation. So why is it important to get a better deal? Well, you probably weren't around for the original easement, the one they want to expand, extend. And oftentimes you will be told that by pipeline companies that don't worry if there's any problems, we'll pay for it. Well, CO2, as Paul described it in this supercritical state and all sorts of other interesting concepts that I don't frankly fully understand, except enough to know this is vastly different than transporting natural gas. And so that means more risk, greater risk. It's untested, it's unknown. And so when they tell you, well, don't worry, everything's going to be fine, now is your opportunity to work in some language in an agreement that helps that actually be true. And when that's not done, it can have real consequences. An example here from Auburn, Nebraska, you can Google this. This was a few years back. Landowner on the property, again, an existing pipeline. Pipeline was already there, just like with you folks, but he didn't know it was there, hits it with a bulldozer. It actually hits two, and two pipelines are ruptured, spilling 250,000 gallons of fuel, onto the land, into water sources. It was a real problem. And the pipeline company, who years ago said, don't worry, if there's a problem, it won't be your responsibility, in this case wasn't so sure. But they became really sure when they got with their team of lawyers and realized, wow, we just lost millions of dollars. We better try to sue somebody to get it. And they ended up suing these people who had the existing pipeline, minding their own business, just like you all, existing pipeline, minding your own business. And they sued these folks for approximately $5 million in federal court in Nebraska, which would have bankrupted them, right? Which would have ruined their entire legacy and put them out of business. we don't want this to happen to you. And so it's important to negotiate in better language if and when we get to that point, better language to protect you. Things that people weren't thinking about 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago when there weren't as many concerns as there are today. Another example is, what about during any type of conversion or expansion, if they have to get on your land? For instance, if you're growing crops during after planting and you've got a crop there and now they're tromping around ruining your crop. Well, wouldn't it be wise to negotiate now a formula of payment so you're not chasing them down, endless phone calls, busy numbers, people hanging up on you, never getting anywhere if that happens. So just two very simple but important examples of why you want to use the leverage you now have in this extending and expanding ask of you to get a better deal, better protections. And that's, again, the whole thing of what we're talking about, what we'd like to get involved with you and help you out on. So terms, other terms, well, abandon in place. Would you want this to be abandoned in place under your land, just kind of sitting there rotting and not ever get paid for it, or not have the option to force a payment, not have it be your choice? Yes, I will allow you to abandon in place when you're done with this, but guess what? For a certain amount of money. I want to be compensated for that risk, or reclamation requirements that require them to remove it and then put your land in back to as close a condition as it was before. I talked a little bit about the liability piece. We want to be careful about that magic word negligence. You don't want to be responsible for any damage, or like those unfortunate clients we had that I shared with you that were sued for $5 million. We want to work out certain magic words and put in the right words to protect you. You still pay insurance as you have all these years. You still pay the property taxes. So you want to make sure that now that this is converted to CO2, does that affect your insurance? Can you even buy insurance for that? Do you have to work in and negotiate financial compensation to try to offset those risks? And then how do you go about calculating that or looking at it? If they want to convert it yet again in the future, shouldn't we spell it out that you absolutely have to be paid or it has to be renegotiated? If in 20 years they want to go to a new substance and now it's your children or your grandchildren who are having to deal with this headache. And rather than paying a one-time fee, how about periodic payments? Something to think about. So these, again, are just a handful of things to consider, and putting them out there for your consideration is one thing, but then working them into an agreement and then having a large amount of landowners that are negotiating in a block to actually affect change and more likely get these concessions and these safeguards is exactly what the Easement Action Team was designed for, and that's what we want to do. So in conclusion, the Easement Action Team will help deal with all communications. Now, if you like to be hounded by phone calls and people stopping by, pressuring you to sign things, trying to convince you of things day after day, then maybe it's not for you. But if you would rather go about your business without the headache, once you become a neat landowner and then sign on for the legal representation, we will be basically the roadblock of the pipeline company to you so that you don't have to deal with that. We will deal with that. We will collect all the communications. We'll have electronic files for each of you and then share the information that you need to know, want to know, as opposed to just being bombarded. Compile the information from other landowners across Nebraska and other states, so we are sharing the best tips, the best practices. And when the time comes, if it does, to negotiate easement terms like we've discussed, then we will help you out with that. And then separately on an individual basis, if you also want help with the dollar amount, given that'll vary from client to client, landowner to landowner, we certainly can help you with that as well. And it all always being focused on the terms and the protections. So that is what NEED is all about. That's what we've done for the last decade. That's what we're doing in multiple states across the country on CO2 pipelines right now. And we think you have a unique opportunity to negotiate, get some financial compensation, and work in some better protections than you would be able to if you thought this was hopeless, if you did nothing or didn't try at all. So with that, I would open it up or throw it back to Jane.
Thanks, Brian. We can take questions either through the chat or through the Q&A if you're using the online version of Zoom. If you're on your phone, you can text a question, and I'll say the phone number twice, to 402-302-2611. Again, that's 402-302-2611. So I know that there's already one question in the Q&A, Brian, and that is from Don, essentially saying the NEAT sign-up form on the Nebraska Easement team site only lists Summit and Navigator, and will we be adding in Trailblazer? I'll make one comment and then throw it to you to expand on. The agreement that we have up there does only have Summit and Navigator because as a team, me, Paul, Brian, as well as organizers have been talking to make sure that we can actually provide a service to the Tallgrass and Trailblazer landowners, because so much of what we're doing with the other landowners that don't have a pipeline on their property yet involves things like trying to stop the permitting process to begin with, stopping the use of eminent domain, et cetera. And so this is going to be just like all of you as landowners are facing one of the first conversion projects that we're aware of in the United States. This is a very new process for us, and we as a team think that there is things that we can do to make your contract stronger, but that's why it only said Summit and Navigator initially. We will get Trailblazer added to that. That was a long question to say, yes, we will edit the form, but I'll throw it to Brian for anything else.
Yep. And so good to hear from Don. Don was with us for many years related to the Trans-Canada matter. Yeah, I echo what Jane said. I mean, and first and foremost, we need to figure out who all is interested, right? This isn't something that we cram down landowners' throats and say, here it is. It's a collaborative process. And so part of this meeting tonight, you know, we've got 31 participants. So I know we have folks that weren't able to make it, but we're recording this. We want to see who's all involved, what your interests are. You know, maybe there's a majority of you that says, let's find a way to stop this completely. Or maybe the majority of you is saying, you know what, let's focus on the negotiation. I mean, we can tailor this based on the clientele and what you want. So right now we are assembling input from folks, getting phone calls, emails, et cetera, putting on forums like this. But yes, we certainly will get an agreement tailored to Trailblazer, but it's also important for us to hear from you and what your preferences are and where you're kind of leaning, because there's different levers that can be pulled depending upon the ultimate goals and outcome.
Thanks, Brian. There is another question in the chat. Who are the people and acceptable ways of communicating with them regarding the Nebraska legislative process, who we can get to help stop this? So I'll answer first, and then if Paul and Brian have other things. We tried to get a couple of things passed in the legislature this past session, including encouraging the Nebraska senators to open up the Major Oil Pipeline Siting Act that many of us who were fighting Keystone got into law. So at least the state of Nebraska had a process for a pipeline routing for oil pipelines. At the time, we didn't think that we should be considering other substances because that wasn't even on our radar. So that was one thing we tried. The legislature didn't even want to write that bill. The one bill that we were able to get in was a decommissioning law, which would have actually assisted, I think, in the negotiation process that you all are facing. They did not vote that out of committee. The problem that we have in the legislature is that so many of the senators only listen to the paid lobbyists who are in their ear all the time talking about how this is going to bring jobs or economic impacts to the state, and don't balance that with the real risks of people who would live with a pipeline forever on their land. The one thing we were able to get out of committee was a study on eminent domain, which is also something that this particular pipeline could come into the study's kind of review, because we've never dealt with landowners signing a contract in our state. We've never dealt with landowners signing a contract for one particular purpose of a pipeline, and then that being converted with them having no say whatsoever. And so that's what you all are dealing with. So it is something that we can encourage Senator Lathrop, who's in charge of that study, to add into the study on what does that mean. But, the most important thing is, of course, to talk to your current state senator, telling them the concerns that you have around carbon pipelines, that we don't have a lot of regulations. We will be pushing different bills at the legislative level in January again, and we're pushing bills at the county level. Obviously with one cautionary flag, as Paul brought up, there's this loophole in Congress, which is what these conversion pipelines know. And so they're kind of getting around local control and state control currently. It doesn't mean that it always has to be that way. And PHMSA issued a memo 2 weeks ago being very clear that they don't have the necessary regulations in place around carbon pipelines. So, but it's almost like all of us in Iowa, Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota, Colorado, Wyoming, it's almost like we're all now being the guinea pigs, because our folks in Congress and the legislature haven't done their job of due diligence on these particular projects. So, Brian, I don't know if you have anything else to add.
Oh, I think that was well said. I mean, there's some fatigue. This is also new, as Paul stated. The feds aren't even on top of it, so it's hard to expect every state, individual state, to have their own hands wrapped around the variation from CO2. It is quite different from petroleum and natural gas, and so unfortunately, they're learning along with the rest of us, which is also why it's just important to kind of slow this process down and not rush it and not feel pressured on an individual basis to sign agreements, easements, leases, whatever it is, because even the pipeline companies don't have it figured out, right? I mean, this pipeline company does not transport CO2 anywhere. So keep that in mind. Like Jane said, we are the guinea pig, and that's why we need to slow down and take a step back and think about this.
And I know we have landowners and families on from Nebraska and Colorado. So I know I talked a lot about the Nebraska legislative process. And in Colorado, we feel like we're in the similar kind of zone, and that while Governor Jared Polis is usually very friendly when it comes to kind of environmental issues, unfortunately, these carbon pipelines, which they're now even calling carbon management systems, to get around the word pipeline, because they know that has brings up a lot of concerns for landowners. The problem is that it's a form of greenwashing, if you've ever heard that term, where oil and gas, fossil fuel interests pretend that they're taking action on climate because they know that's what the majority of Americans want them to do. But really, this is just about them making more money and potentially putting all of us in harm's way. If we're serious about climate change policies, there's obviously a lot more climate friendly practices that our governments could be doing with the billions of dollars they put on the table, including just basic carbon sequestration that a lot of farmers and ranchers already do with existing plants and other practices that they use, like no-till farming.
I just want to add to that, to the Colorado folks with us. We talked about the Nebraska Easement Action Team, but in terms of negotiation, the negotiations protections would really be the same. I mean, we don't want Nebraska to have the good ones and Colorado to get left behind. And so if you might be thinking, well, I didn't see a Colorado Easement Action Team, you can effectively join up under the Nebraska team, because we're going to deal with the same subject matter. If it went on and where we had to actually file legal actions and then get into court, which is probably unlikely with these, that would be different. But I just want you to understand, you are welcome within our existing model with Nebraska.
So there's a comment about if you want to get involved in commenting to FERC, the federal agency commission that regulates if this particular gas pipeline is going to be able to be abandoned, which then gives them the ability to convert to a carbon pipeline. That deadline is June 30th. So how do we go about doing that? So I'll answer quickly that Mark is our communications director. He's on. I'm sure that we can put up a blog describing how you can submit a comment. It's not a complicated process. I'll let Paul answer further on that, but we also need to know how many landowners are interested in potentially filing as interveners. And so that's something in the coming days that we would need to know from you all if we have kind of a critical mass number of landowners, so we can go to FERC with that information.
Yeah, and what I'll say is that the FERC in their notice of the comment period and intervention period has detailed instructions for how to file comments or how to intervene. And so what we'll do is we'll post those on our website and get those out to everybody who wants them, you know, after this call. You can file comments either in writing, an email, or through their filing system. And the intervention would require a more detailed document. So that's enough. But if you have any more questions, just let us know.
Yeah, so public comment, easy to do on their website. Becoming an intervener is a much more complicated process, and something Brian's representing landowners, for example, in Iowa and South Dakota as interveners in their permitting process for a state process that they have in place. One of the questions, which I'm sure many of you have, is, so how does this like work? How does it logistically work? There's a question about costs, that this could potentially take months, if not years, to figure out. And so I'll let Brian kind of explain how the model works, and then can add some things to that as well.
Yep, sure. So the cost, the model is that, I mean, it's kind of all for one and one for all. And so however many folks there are, let's say there's 50, you would divide the cost associated with the actions that we have, you know, agreed we're going to do 1/50th, right? So every person would have 1/50th, treated the same, treated fairly, etc. And so if you think, well, I'll try to do this on my own, that's fine. You'd be paying 100% of the cost to accomplish whatever it is your goals are, whereas here it's a fraction. So for instance, in South Dakota, we filed what are called intervention, and they're proceeding there for over 230 people. So imagine the cost savings when they divide that all out, and it's literally pennies on the dollar of what it would be charged. So I don't have I can't say, well, here's what it's going to cost, because we frankly don't know. We don't know which direction we want to go. And we're still in the kind of the Trailblazer gathering information phase to see how many people are involved. So like in Iowa, we started out, right? You start out with 0 every time. And then the first people come, and then the next people come, and all of a sudden we're at 50, then we're at 100, now we're at 130 plus. And so the momentum grows, but we want to get a little better indication of who's interested. And then we'll have more specific updates you can get on our email list, and we can get into the nitty gritty. But long story short, you're in for a fraction of the whole, which means you want to talk to your neighbors, right? Because if you have it, someone surrounding you has it. Well, probably 2 people, right, on either side of you. Get them involved. Every person you recruit, your costs go down. And that's kind of the model, so that everyone's incentivized to get more people involved. I don't make any more money if there's 5 or 5,000. You all save more. We're doing the work regardless, and we like to spread it out over 100 rather than 10 if we can.
And you know, we will update a sign up form on the Nebraska Easement website for Trailblazer. We will do that in the next couple of days, and also on the Nebraska Easement site, as well as on the Pipeline Fighters Hub, we'll have a call to action on how you can submit comments to FERC. We will submit a comment to FERC and ask them to extend the deadline, because this has come very quick for folks, and June 30th is obviously only 10 days away. The other thing that folks should know is, you know, when you sign up with the Nebraska Easement Action Team, then that gives you the ability to tell Trailblazer and Tallgrass, I have legal representation now, please go through them. It also sends the signal to Tallgrass and Trailblazer that this is not going to be an easy process. They may be a great and fine and friendly pipeline company. We've never had to interact with them on a long-term doing business. And maybe when Brian comes up with terms with all of you on things that you would want to see in the contract before moving forward, maybe they'll willingly put those in place. But it is more likely than not that they will do that only if there is a good number of you coming together and demanding that together. That's how companies are forced to move in a better direction, making sure the protections are in place when folks are coming together at the table. So there is no pressure on you right now legally, I just want to say, to sign a contract with Trailblazer and Tallgrass. There is no deadline in our state government that is on your shoulders to sign a contract. In Iowa and South Dakota, there's a clear process that they're following, and there may be a deadline down the road for landowners in those particular states because of their process. But in Nebraska, we have no process. You're under no restriction or you're under no timeline to sign. It may feel pressure. I don't know what Tallgrass is actually saying to landowners. We know what they're saying to Summit and Navigator. But if they're saying things like, if you sign this revised contract now, we'll give you a signing bonus. That's usually one of their selling points. Or if you don't sign this now, you won't get a signing bonus. They use kind of all sorts of different tactics usually. But in the end, we always know when landowners come together and they stick together, the price and terms are always better in the end. And that's the most important thing. Or this pipeline could potentially get stopped. And so that's the other angle that this could take. I'm just reading to see if there's any other questions. One person asked if we were going to have in-person meetings like we have for some in Navigator, so we can all see each other face to face and meet each other. And the answer is yes. We are going to come up with meetings in August. So we've done a series of in-person and online meetings over the past several months, not only in Nebraska, but in the other states as well. We'll do another round of in-person meetings in August, including 2 particular sites for Trailblazer. So if just watch the Nebraska Easement website for that, or you can even sign up on Nebraska Easement to get our emails, and we send out information when we're doing meetings. We also send mailers, which is probably how you knew about this particular event. And then this recording, because we're very transparent in everything that we do, this recording will be on Nebraska Easement, so you can share that link with other neighbors that are trying to learn more as well. I think that may be it for questions. Okay, I think that's it for questions. So let me just say in closing that, and then I'll throw it to Paul and Brian for any closing remarks. I know that this can be very overwhelming and stressful, but it becomes less stressful and less overwhelming when you join as a team. So I strongly encourage you to consider becoming part of the Nebraska Easement Action Team. It will protect your rights a lot better than you going it alone. It will send the clear message to the Tallgrass folks that landowners are serious about being treated fairly in this process. Because this is so new, you deserve that at a minimum. And you deserve things in your contract that when your grandparents or you yourself signed it many years ago would have never thought about asking for. Things like a decommissioning plan, things like adding additional financial resources, because this is now a different, more riskier pipeline. So those are all things that we can help you with. And we're here for you at the bottom line. That's the whole reason why we exist. So Paul and Brian, if you have any closing remarks.
Well, I'll go ahead and then I'll end.
Sorry, did you just ask me to go ahead, Brian? I think
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Paul.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to say that there's a great many unknowns. We stressed that in the call tonight about these pipelines and how they operate and what their safety risks are. And, we think that people should take a step back, and all levels of government should review what the risks of these pipelines are and let citizens know those risks so that they can fairly evaluate what their situations are. So we encourage people to get involved. Unfortunately, you're on the cutting edge and we're the bleeding edge of these these CO2 pipeline fights. And, that's, like it or not, that's the situation. But, because there's so many unknowns, we strongly encourage you to, be engaged and to protect yourselves and your family and your livestock and your land.
Yep, well said there. Pretty simply stated, you don't want to do this on your own. You have a real chance to affect change and basically improve upon that agreement that you probably were not a part of, had no input in, and are realizing, wow, I wish I could have, maybe been there at that time. Had I known what I know now, we would have done that differently. Well, now we're at that point. So let's not let this opportunity pass us by. It's really exciting that this team you're talking to here is working in multiple states on these very issues and working with other subject matter experts. And so you'd be hard pressed to find another team of people that have their arms wrapped around all the various issues that are affecting you right now. So strongly encourage you to join up, get your emails on the Nebraska Easement Action Team or through Jane and Mark so we can stay connected. As we move forward, we're going to get a better idea of price and cost. And also, most importantly, spread the word. Spread the word to all your neighbors and friends. Let them know. No urgency to sign anything. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity to improve upon something that most people never can by working on the terms, and also get some compensation for yourself and your family along the way to better protect yourself. So really make sure you take this opportunity seriously. And we hope to have you all join up. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Look forward to seeing you at one of the in-person meetings in August. Talk to you soon.